Hello and welcome. It's Francis here. Thank you for coming back to my channel. If this is your first time here, I bid thee welcome. There's a subscribe and a bell below that you might wish to subscribe so you don't miss out on any new content when I upload it, because I do upload things on a rather ad hoc basis. So in this video, I'm wanting to talk about our upcoming new moon, which will be in the astrological sign of Aries. So it will mark the first new moon for the astrological year, which of course commences in Aries. And here in Adelaide, it will be taking place on the 1st of April, so April Fools, at 4:54 p.m. Now it's a bit of a interesting new moon. Before I go any further, I should just do a disclaimer. I'm not an astrologer. I have just gathered some information that I found of interest to me from various astrologers that I do follow, and I'll link them below, because every astrologer out there has a different slant or interest, or picks up on different planets and connections with other planets and asteroids, etc. So it's quite a very in-depth subject, so I just sort of focus on what I find of interest. What I do find of interest is that the moon will be 11 degrees 30 minutes of Aries. The sun will also be 11 degrees 30 minutes of Aries. This is why it is a new moon. We also have Chiron, which is known as the wounded healer, at 12 degrees 18 minutes of Aries. And added to the mix is Mercury in Aries, so it's 9 degrees 44 minutes. So when you look at these 4 planets and asteroids, this is called a stellium, when there's 3 or more planets all together in the one sign, and this relates to a very intense new moon, especially for this new year, astrological year I should say, and as such it's going to set the pattern for probably the next 3 to 6 months, so it is quite intense. Now, adding to the stellium of the 4 planets, we also have a conjunction between Venus, Mars and Saturn. They're conjunct in Aquarius, and I've talked a little bit about this previously with the full moon videos as well. And there's a few other bits and bobs taking place, but when we just look at the stellium with the 4 planets in Aries and this conjunction in Aquarius, this is almost like the big frying pan hit over the head by the universe, asking us to pay attention to this new moon, and in particular where Aries is in our astrological or our natal chart. So you might want to go on to these number of free websites like Astrodentist and a few others like Cafe Astrology. You can just type in free natal chart or birth chart. You may know of an astrologer who will do one up for you to actually ascertain where Aries is in your chart, because it's going to start drawing on that energy. Now, what's really interesting is also Chiron, the wounded healer, is in the mix. So Chiron's energy is usually very subtle, and it influences us rather on a subconscious level until it transits around. And again, if you look into your chart, you might be able to find out where Chiron is too. So if you're feeling a number of, should we say, challenges, I won't say issues, but challenges beginning to bubble up to the surface, this could be the wounds that Chiron is bringing our attention to, for things that we need to start dealing with and looking at this stage in our life. If nothing is coming up, well then maybe Chiron hasn't transited around in your chart as yet. So it all depends on how old you are, and again where these planets are in your chart. So coupled with that, this being a new moon, and the new moon is basically an opportunity for us to set ourselves up. We've got this sort of Aries energy, which is full of enthusiasm, sort of rushing out where angels fear to tread, foot on the accelerator, not worrying about where we're heading, making any plans or even the consequences. So we've got this very strong forward motion happening, and it's going to impact upon areas in our life where we may need some deep soul healing. So the new moon offers us opportunities to look at how we're going to do this healing. We don't have to do with it. We could suppress Chiron again, but it's a little bit like dealing with the shadow. It's not going to go away. It'll come up again at a later stage in our life. However, when we're looking at Chiron, it can actually indicate where we may feel some blockages or disadvantages in our life as to, again, what house it is in. So when Chiron transits around, it's almost like it brings about a, quote, healing crises, in that things may appear a little bit worse before they get better. It's an analogy of that is, if we've got a fever, we feel pretty crappy before we get better, but we know that our body is actually going through a healing process as it fights the virus, so to speak. So when Chiron appears in our charts, it is bringing a lot of this healing that we need to undergo out into the open. And it asks us to pay attention to these parts, especially parts that may be broken or wounded, or yes, that we've pushed back into our subconscious. It's about identifying and then transforming that energy, that ability, and this is what Chiron is. That's why it's called the wounded healer. It's looking at, or encouraging us to look at aspects in our life that may have been, quote, wounded through various experiences, in either in our childhood or even in a previous life, and then when we identify with it as opposed to pushing it out into the shadows, we can then transform this work into something else. So our primal identity wound helps us actually to see the beauty of our uniqueness, as well as the beauty of the uniqueness in other people. Our wound, if our wounds in relation to our self-confidence, it can actually transform into a healthy self-reliance, where we can actually look after not only our own selves but also other people without burning out. Those are just two examples. So we've got all that coupled with this new moon in Aries. So as I said, Aries is almost like, moving my notes around, it's almost like taking a deep breath and jumping into the unknown, because Aries are known for their rushing in where angels fear to tread. So we've got all this Aries energy, which is very impulsive, sort of connecting with the individual, but also in a way where it's not egocentric, where it's actually paying tribute to the divinity wherever we see that within ourselves, knowing that or understanding that we are actually the creator of our own reality, but in that understanding, acknowledging that this creation doesn't just sort of live within the thinking mind, is tapping into a more ancient part within ourselves. So where we call it soul, divinity, God, goddess, guardian angel, spirit, whatever. It's something that's within or even beyond ourselves that we're tapping back into. So Aries energy can be very impulsive, and it has its benefits in that it stops you from overthinking or it's encouraging us to stop overthinking, to just do things a little bit impulsive, sort of throw away all our restraints for a moment, especially if we find ourselves not doing stuff because we overanalyze it, and which ends up being a self-sabotation. Sabotation, is that such a word? I don't know. We end up really self-sabotaging what we're wanting to achieve. It also relates to the physical body, especially the head, allowing us to think, but also encouraging us to move beyond that little mindset and listening to our physical body, moving our physical body, getting a little bit more active than what we normally or may normally do. Chiron connecting with this, it's also asking us to expose our wounds. I was talking about that earlier, that Chiron sort of brings this up to the surface, and we can even rip off these bandages ourselves, so to speak. So it's like if you've had a wound, you've covered up with a plaster or a band-aid, and sometimes the best way for it to heal is that it needs to dry out, it needs to be exposed. So it's encouraging us, once they expose our dirty laundry, but take ownership and take responsibility of our wound. Own it completely. And this to me sort of really couples in with shadow work, is that part of shadow work that I do feel maybe it's not addressed properly these days, is that ownership, that taking responsibility and saying, yes, I don't know, for example, get angry, and that's okay, that's part of me. This is how I let off steam. I'm not going to suppress it anymore. I may look at ways to best manage that, like transferring that energy through to, I don't know, take up a boxing class, or learn to channel that into pottery or digging in the garden or something like that. So actually transferring that anger and moving that through our system, but also allowing ourselves to feel the emotion, which I think is very important these days. Just looking at my notes. We've got Mercury. I did mention Mercury. Mercury is all about the mind. It's about quickness. It's about mental alertness, quick thinking, the adaptability, curiosity. It can also relate to our communication, the ways that we communicate. So these are things that could be coming up because the new moon will be conjunct Mercury. But the main overriding connection that seems to be in a lot of the astrological sites that I've looked at so far, and I'll list them all below so you can see them in more depth, is this connection with Chiron. And Chiron, of course, is one of the centaurs from Greek mythology. So again, it's in relation to childhood wounds or wounds that we may have carried over from a previous life, beginning to resurface or come to our forefront and acknowledging them. So it may not necessarily be a moon to focus on manifestation still. It may still be a new moon. We've had a number of these almost last year of, again, clearing out and identifying before we brush off where angels fear to tread. But this Aries nature is going to encourage us to do that. So it's a bit of a two-pronged new moon, bringing up some emotional issues or trauma or instances in our life that we may need to start addressing, but also taking the courage to sort of seize the bull by the horns, so to speak, or in typical Aries fashion, rush off where angels fear to tread. So I hope that has been of interest, and I'll put the links below till we meet again. Blessing.